to operate that program, or else EPA can take it back. EPA has never taken it back, but we'll get to that. So the Clean Water Act has a provision that says citizens can petition EPA to what's called de-delegate or take back that program. And if you do that, EPA is obligated to respond to you in writing. And another federal law says that not only do they have to do it within a reasonable time, but if they don't, citizens can sue them in federal court. Next. So a bunch of us got together and actually wrote that petition. We focused specifically on Iowa's failure to regulate factory farms because none of the hog confinements in the state, despite hundreds of documented discharges, have been issued a Clean Water Act permit. Next. We also found that in the rare occasion when DNR has issued a Clean Water Act permit to an open feedlot factory farm, we found that those permits did not meet the requirements of federal law. Next. We also found that DNR is not acting on violations, so when a factory farm had a discharge or otherwise didn't meet requirements, we found that in a lot of cases DNR was essentially looking the other way, not really taking a meaningful enforcement action. And then we found that DNR was not issuing adequate penalty actions when there was a manure spill or some other type of violation. Even when they did issue a penalty, the penalties were really weak. They were not going to deter another violation. It was just the cost of doing business. And we found that they weren't inspecting factory farms properly, partly because they didn't have enough staff, and partly because they just weren't doing a very rigorous job when they actually did inspect. Next. So EPA predictably did not respond to this petition. We put out a lot of different allegations. It was very detailed. And EPA proceeded to sit on that petition until about 2011 when we decided maybe it's time to sue them for unreasonable delay, because that's our right, and it's our right to give an answer to that petition. So what we did is we sent them a letter threatening to sue them, and it actually got their attention. So EPA begrudgingly agreed to take a look at our petition, see if it had any merit, and investigate Iowa DNR's factory farm program to see if we were making any good allegations. And I think they wanted to find that everything was fine, deny our petition and walk away, but they couldn't do that because the problems were so severe that they even had to acknowledge them. So EPA agreed with us that DNR wasn't issuing Clean Water Act permits when required. They also found that DNR had failed to do something they're required to do under the Clean Water Act, which is basically they have to do what's called a comprehensive survey of all of the facilities subject to their regulation. So if they want to be able to run the Clean Water Act program, they have to know who's subject to the Clean Water Act in their state, right? That makes sense. We found out they hadn't really done that, and they didn't know which factory farms were discharging and needed permits and which ones were fine. Next. EPA also found that even though DNR had a decent enforcement policy on paper, they weren't following it. In a lot of cases, they were just going off script and doing something less than their own policy said they had to do. Next. And similarly, they found that the penalties specifically for violations were not adequate to deter violations and that they didn't meet federal requirements. Next. You can go to the next one. So after that investigation report came out, it was a response to our petition, but it wasn't a final answer. It was just an interim report because they found all these problems. The next step was, all right, we've never taken back program authority and we don't want to start now, so let's give the state a chance to fix these problems, come into compliance, and then we can deny the petition. So that's what EPA had in mind. So they came up with this work plan agreement with the DNR where they focused in on those deficiencies and came up with a 5-year plan for the DNR to fix the program so it can keep it. Huh. And one of the key parts of that plan is that DNR agreed to do on-site inspections of all large concentrated animal feeding operations, the biggest factory farms, and several categories of medium ones, the ones that had discharges that were super close to waterways, and they were supposed to do about 20% of those every year. Next. They also had to, for all the rest of the thousands of medium factory farms in the state that don't meet those categories, they said they would do an assessment using existing, documentation, manure management plans, things like that. Also 20% a year. They also got some increased money from the legislature and hired some additional field staff to do these inspections and keep on that 20% a year. They also agreed to do an assessment so that they could identify those unknown facilities that might not be in their database. We'll come back to that. And they also had to do a variety of updates and improvements to their inspection protocols and their enforcement practices. And so they've started tracking those actions much more carefully and actually have made some meaningful improvements in how they do those things. Next. And also in 2014, one of the big parts of that work plan is that, if you issue permits, the permits themselves have to meet federal requirements as well. And until they updated their regulations in 2014, which I think a lot of you were probably involved in that action, those permitting rules in the state were totally out of date and not adequate. So we got them to fix their regulations. Now we just need to make them use them. Next. And that's the sticking point, that last bullet. They have to actually issue permits to polluters.
Which they
and that's
have not
a key
done.
part of the work plan. It's the most important part of the work plan. You can't just have the right standard operating procedures. You can't just go out and do inspections. You have to, at the end of the day, make polluters get permits. And that has been what they've absolutely refused to do. Next. So we've been tracking this really carefully through the annual reports that DNR is required to submit to EPA. And the third annual report just came out on August 1st. So we're 3 years into a 5-year work plan. Next. And most of what we found out in that annual report was pretty much the same as the last couple of years. Next. So they finished those permit rules in 2014. Next. They've pretty much kept on track with that 20% a year of inspections. So they've gone out to thousands of facilities, and it's amazing. Every single one of them isn't polluting, and not a single one of them needs a permit. It's unbelievable. They've also made some of those other improvements we found to their violation databases and things like that, so we can more carefully evaluate what they're doing. But one of the most revealing things in this work plan report is that DNR finished going around the state and looking using aerial maps and other resources to try to figure out what the full inventory of facilities is and whether they had identified all of them. Now, they have about 9,000 factory farms in the state database, and they found 5,000 more. Totally under the radar. They might not all be large or medium facilities that need manure management plans. Who knows if, some of them might not be subject to the Clean Water Act, but that's part of the problem. We have no idea how many are. And not only that, but DNR said in its work plan, it's not even going to get out there and look at these 5,000 facilities until after the work plan is completed, because they said that this is, quote, outside the scope of the work plan. I thought the work plan was supposed to bring them into compliance with the Clean Water Act, not just allow them to check some boxes. But basically they've admitted that they are not going to have a compliant program after 5 years. When the work plan is over, they're still going to have 5,000 mystery factory farms out there that may or may not be subject to the Clean Water Act and may or may not need permits. So to me that says in 5 years, EPA should really come in and yank this program back because DNR will have failed. Next. So I just put this up there again so you can imagine this map with about 5,000 more dots on it and think about what that means for DNR's ability to do its job, implementing the Clean Water Act,
or
and
lack of.
How far we have yet to go. Next. So we do have a lot of ideas. As I mentioned, the work plan is going to be over in 2 years, and EPA hasn't said anything yet about how it plans to deal with the fact that now we pretty much know the work plan is going to fail to bring the state's program into compliance with the federal law. But the rest of the work plan obligations, DNR is probably going to be able to say it checked all the boxes. It'll have gotten through 100% of the inspections of its initial database, and it will have updated all of its inspection procedures. And it'll probably make the case to EPA that case closed, we did all the things we said we would do, you should deny the petition and leave us alone. Next. We've also found out through a lot of negotiations with EPA that they're very much not inclined to pressure DNR to issue permits. Instead of coming in when there's a manure spill and saying, DNR, you have to issue that factory farm a permit, EPA has been bending over backwards to help the DNR come up with a list of things that a factory farm can do to, quote, permanently remedy the discharge so that they can avoid getting a permit. So EPA has not been an ally on that issue, and permitting is going to continue to be a huge problem, and I don't think we're going to get a hog factory permit issued before this entire process is resolved. And as I mentioned, after this work plan is supposedly over, 5,000 facilities will remain uninspected. Next. So we do have some, proactive steps in the works. We anticipate, of course, we always knew that after this work plan was over, our work wouldn't be over, but we've been really patient in trying to let this process play out and see if we can make meaningful progress. But right now we're trying to bring in as many other resources to bear on this as possible, and one of those is a really great relationship developing between Iowa CCI and the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Iowa, Kevin Techow. He's only been in his position for I think about a year or a year and a half, and he has shown a huge interest in factory farm pollution enforcement, which is a really fantastic ally to have. He has a lot of tools we don't have. He can file a criminal case against a factory farm. We can't do that as citizens, and EPA sure doesn't seem like it's interested in those types of tactics. So we're going to continue trying to help him find good cases that can result in permits, that can result in, big scary penalties that might actually change business as usual.
Maybe shut a few of them down.
And then, of course, when this work plan is resolved, as I said, EPA is really going to want to close the book on this process. I think there's a good chance that they are going to take that as an opportunity to say problem solved, deny our petition formally, and walk away. And at that point, we'll have what's called a final agency action. That means that we can go to court and tell EPA that denial was arbitrary and sue them for it. So we're going to have to seriously think about that. And then, of course, we have to keep working at the local level and at the community level in Iowa, because the Federal Clean Water Act is not our only tool, and legal tools alone obviously are not going to give us the systems change that we need. So we're working with you guys on building local control in the state. And leading up to the legislative session, one thing that we're working on is drafting a petition to the Iowa DNR to strengthen the master matrix process, because right now it's just a sham process that pretends to give communities and counties the right to object to a new factory farm. But you only have to get a 50% of the points in this master matrix system to approve a new factory farm. So it's almost impossible to use this and actually keep a new operation out. So we want to really strengthen the master matrix to help build in some real local control as a step towards going to the State House and demanding much stronger local control than you could possibly get with this matrix. Next. And then finally, along the lines of thinking big and aiming higher, we're also not just going to rely on the Iowa DNR, the Iowa Legislature, and EPA Region 7, because they're not going to save us, right? We're going to go over their heads, and we're going to go to the US EPA, and we're going to demand that they completely change their regulations for factory farms. Because if a state like Iowa, with hundreds of documented manure spills, is getting away without issuing permits, and EPA Region 7 is looking the other way, obviously the whole system is broken. So we're going to be petitioning EPA to basically start from scratch, require factory farms to get permits, and make those permits much stronger and more protective of water quality. And that's going to be happening in the next couple months, and we're hoping that CCI will join us on that petition and come up with some really creative ways to organize and build power around that.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the workaround that the states and feds are pushing, because as Tara said, EPA and states are being, including Iowa, pulled kicking and screaming into their role of actually regulating the agricultural industry. And one of the off-ramps that they've been really promoting is water pollution trading. Proponents of it call it water quality trading or nutrient trading. Nutrients sound benign, but in animal manure you have a lot of nitrogen, a lot of phosphorus. When it gets into your waterways, it creates algae blooms that suck up all the oxygen out of the water, killing aquatic life.
Carbon
it can really
emissions
pose very
trading
significant
that
health threats if
is
it gets
currently
into your
going on in
water.
some
So nitrate
places.
contamination, of drinking water,
But
increases
this
certain
is
types of cancers,
manure
can result in
and,
blue baby syndrome, which can result in
factory farm
infant mortality. And so nutrients are very serious, a very serious problem, and what we're trying to control. The water pollution trading, this market mechanism, has been mostly debated at the level of theory. So we decided to ground truth where it's been implemented for the longest period of time. I have our reports here that you can pick up that provide some case studies in Pennsylvania where it's taken hold for the longest in the Chesapeake Bay region. And also we did some case studies in Ohio because power plants have been pushing a multi-state trading program there because there have been some good air laws passed over the last several decades that have forced power plants to scrub air emissions. And the unintended consequence of that is that they're shifting some pollution into the waterways. They do not want to pay to upgrade their plants to treat that water pollution. Instead, they want to buy their way out of having to do that. So next slide. As Tara said, the Clean Water Act that's been on the books for 40 plus years has been pretty successful when implemented and when enforced. And it's been implemented and enforced against a number of regulated sectors. Again, agriculture, even though it should be regulated in the Clean Water Act, has largely escaped it. Next slide. We want Clean Water Act permits. Tara talked about this a little bit because they have strict limits on pollution. They also make the operation accountable, and the permits are transparent in that they're renewed every 5 years. You can comment on those permits, you can sue under the permits, you can get information that the regulated entity has to provide every month to the agency about how they're performing, whether they're in compliance with the permit. And if they violate the terms of their permit, they can be subject to enforcement, including penalties, and hopefully penalties that are high enough to deter future behavior as opposed to making it the cost of doing business. That's what CCI and others are fighting for, to have permits for factory farms, and why they're fighting for that in Iowa. With trading, it's a rollback of our federal environmental laws because instead of having permits at all for nutrients, they have no permit. You're just allowed to buy or pollute as much as you can afford to buy. So we call it the sky's the limit. These trading schemes are impossible to track or verify in that the transactions between the credit generator and the credit purchaser are done privately through third-party brokers who skim off the top of the transaction. And so when you have no permit limit, you can just purchase as much as you want, and you have no way of knowing whether the credits are real. It makes it impossible for citizens to have any kind of oversight over the process. And there's no real ability to enforce for permit violations because actually there's no real limit, right? You just can do as much as you want. There's nothing to enforce. Next slide. So on the credit purchasing side, an example of this sky's the limit is the Bruner Island coal-fired power plant in Pennsylvania. So what we found was they could discharge as much pollution as they could afford to purchase credits to cover. So in 2014, they discharged 78,000 pounds of nitrogen. And in 2013, 87,000 pounds of nitrogen. And they were discharging into an impaired waterway. And they could have discharged 100,000 pounds of nitrogen if they could have afforded to purchase the credits or find the credits. Next slide. On the credit generation side, this program was primarily developed for the agricultural operation, but we also find that in some places wastewater treatment plants are also generating credits, so a lot of them will have headroom in their permits to account for population growth above what they need, and they're just selling it off. The Clean Water Act says that they shouldn't have that headroom. If they can afford it, they don't need it, and they can afford to do better, they should be doing better. But most of the credits are being generated in Pennsylvania by the ag sector, and some of them, a very small percentage, 7.6%, are being generated through farm best management practices, or BMP. So if they put a buffer strip in, for example, that could generate some credits. Poultry litter combustion is the #1 source of credit generation, mostly from one gasification plant. So this is a whole other topic we could go to, manure to energy. But manure to energy is being sold as another win-win and a way to address our excess nutrient problem. So this is a gasification plant that's taking poultry waste and burning it. And they are generating credits from that process. Anyway, so there's lots of reasons why that's not a good idea in and of itself, but these big companies are building these incinerators and gasification plants and digesters through the financing of, or using planning, getting tongue-tied here, they're financing these projects through water pollution trading and also carbon cap and trade as well. Poultry litter export in Pennsylvania is a big way to generate credits for factory farms. They're just transporting the waste off-site instead of land applying it on the land that they own and control and getting credits for that. So next slide. So we looked at the poultry litter export because that's primarily where factory farms were engaged, and we found that most of the waste was being moved from one impaired watershed or multiple impaired watersheds to the western part of the state to another impaired watershed and being dumped mostly on one farm that was also a broker for the credits. And so when you then ask the agency, well, where are the records showing then where the manure goes from that farm, they didn't have manifest systems for that. So in theory, it could have gone to western PA, to an impaired watershed, and back to the place where it came from. There was no way to know that, no way to track it. It was this sort of pollution shell game where they were just shifting around the state. Next. So the agricultural industry knows that this is a sham that works in their favor. So the Delmarva Poultry Institute is the #1 lobby group for the poultry industry on the eastern shore of Maryland and actually for Delmarva, so little parts of Delaware and Virginia as well. And they've described it as a way for farmers to make money while help other sources of pollution like sewage treatment plants increase their pollution loadings to waterways. And I do not agree with DPI on 99% of things, but in terms of their characterization of water quality trading, we agree, right? It's a way for farmers to make a little bit of money without any real accountability so that other polluters can increase their pollution loads to our water bodies. Next slide. So what are we doing about this? So a couple of years ago, Senator Cardin, who is generally a friend from the state of Maryland, actually tried to amend the Clean Water Act to gut the permitting program and replace it with a water pollution trading program. That effort failed, but we did not have champions in Congress. First of all, we were blindsided by Cardin, who has strong ties to Purdue and Tyson and others that operate in Maryland. And it was actually the first time that we'd ever heard about water pollution trading. But we're in the process of trying to educate Congress because there have been hearings about trading that have not included our perspective, and we need champions to fight back from any future attempts to amend the Clean Water Act. So we've got a national sign-on letter circulating around the country. CCI signed on to it. We need to, and we started to work with Senator Booker's offices and others trying to find champions to represent our interests and stop any kind of clean water amendments. Next slide. We want Congress also to stop funding from taxpayer funding from going to these programs and to states. And so this chart shows, if you notice, the highest amount of funding is to the Electric Power Research Institute. EPRI is a lobby group for the power plant industry. So now we have taxpayer dollars going to the power plant industry so that they can figure out how to avoid complying with our laws. Next slide. We need mandatory measures for agricultural operations. Voluntary approaches have not worked. This is another voluntary scheme. Factory farms are point sources under the Clean Water Act. They're often treated as non-point sources, but we also need, we need mandatory controls the Clean Water Act enforced for factory farms and also for crop farmers, also who pollute our waterways. We need requirements for them as well. The Clean Water Act is not the best tool for crop farmers, but the Clean Water Act authorizes states to be more stringent than the Clean Water Act when required to protect your waterways, and so they could come up and develop regulations for crop farmers as well. Next slide. To just amplify this point, the Government Accountability Office, which provides oversight of our agencies, our federal agencies, did a compliance report around TMDLs. TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. So if you have an impaired waterway, and you have many of them in the state of Iowa, the state's supposed to come up with a cleanup plan. So
we
pollution
have
diet, that's what a TMDL is for a particular
725.
impaired waterway. And when GAO looked at those plans and what the impact of them has been, they found that where there were mandatory controls, we had 80% compliance. When we had voluntary controls, largely for the agricultural sector, we had 20% compliance. And their conclusion was that, until we change our approach to agricultural sources of pollution in particular, the Act's goals are likely to be unfulfilled. We're not going to meet our water quality goals if we continue just to try to incentivize ag with, through voluntary programs. We also want to challenge water pollution trading. As I said, we think it's a rollback of the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act requires each source of pollution to work towards eliminating that pollution. There is no allowance or opportunity to get out of that requirement by buying credits, right? We think it's illegal. And we sued EPA when they first authorized trading to be used in the Chesapeake Bay region. Our case was dismissed because at that point in time the court said, this program hasn't been around enough, you can't show the harm that's necessary in order to bring this lawsuit. So that was a couple years ago. We now have been looking at permits to challenge to make this argument. Tara's identified some and is on the verge of filing our lawsuit, and so we hope to establish that it's per se illegal, and if we win that lawsuit, the industry will run to Congress and try to amend the Clean Water Act to undo our victory, which is why on a parallel track we need to continue to educate congressional members and identify champions. The environmental community needs to actively oppose water pollution trading. I think we have allies, traditional allies, who support it because people are just fed up with government and think, well, maybe this is a creative approach, it's a market-based approach, maybe the market will solve our problems. Well, again, it's not creative, it's not new, and that it's a voluntary program that isn't providing any accountability for the ag sector, but it's actually worsening the situation by allowing other polluters off the hook as well. We looked at the time of the report, there were 22 states that had programs up and running or in development. Iowa was not on this list, but it should be now. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Last slide, or next slide. So these next set of slides are not my own. These are from the Iowa League of Cities. The Iowa League of Cities in Iowa is the primary proponent of water pollution trading. And the reason for that is there's a little bit of a driver here. There's a nutrient reduction strategy, so all Mississippi River states are supposed to be coming up with nutrient reduction strategies to address the huge dead zone in the end of the Gulf, right? And much of that nutrient pollution from Iowa is coming from agricultural sector. And so the strategies calls for a 45% reduction of nutrients from all sources. Okay, next slide. According to the Iowa League of Cities, Iowa's a great place for nutrient trading because you have all this agriculture here that could generate credits. So you're number one corn producer, pork producer, egg producer. Next slide. And so within the nutrient strategy itself, they have incorporated trading explicitly as a mechanism for meeting that 45% reduction goals. And I can share these slides. I know it's a lot of words. Next slide. And the Iowa League of Cities is particularly interested because under the nutrient strategies, they have over 100 municipal wastewater facilities that could be covered. And it's very expensive to upgrade our infrastructure, in part because we've ignored it for so long. Our answer is not that we should be ignoring our infrastructure and creating more Flint-like crises, but that we should figure out a way to upgrade it and not let municipalities off the hook. When I was at EPA, we often sued municipalities for non-compliance with the Clean Water Act, and when they were small and didn't have large tax bases, we worked with them on timing, on a compliance schedule. Maybe it was 30 years long, which allowed them to amortize the costs over time, but it wasn't about, let's allow you to continue to ignore your infrastructure and make problems increasingly worse. Next slide. And so the Iowa League of Cities provided a bit of a timeline for how this is all developed. In 2013, that's when the nutrient reduction strategy came out. There were identification of pilot cities for projects, and there was some state funding that was initially put towards these pilot projects. Ultimately, the Iowa League of Cities got a National Conservation Innovation Grant from USDA of, I think it was $700,000 to help make this go in Iowa. Next slide. And his last slide talks about fields of opportunity. Again, just to summarize, we have this driver, we have this nutrient reduction strategy. He wasn't sure about whether he could make the market go, but he said, you know what, we don't even really need a market. We can just cut these deals privately. Again, no public involvement, right? The cities would cut the deal with the farmer to purchase the credits. We've got, farmers should love this. It's a familiar vehicle for them in the sense that they're getting money to put in best management practices. We now have, billions of dollars of subsidies through the Farm Bill and through state programs going to farmers already to do these best management practices. In some cases, states allow this kind of double dipping. We've got university support in Iowa to help us establish these programs, and we've got some funding through the state revolving fund, which is a private loans for infrastructure improvements. And we've got the Des Moines Water Works lawsuit, which has sort of raised the profile of all of these ag-related issues, calling for ag to have to do something, and this is something we want them to do, engage in water pollution trading. So we talked to Dustin Miller at Iowa League of Cities. He's no longer there. He went to a law firm which I suspect will be representing the Iowa League of Cities and municipalities in their efforts to get trading off the
Revolving
ground. The
door.
good news is it's very early stages. So there's some pilot projects in Dubuque, a pilot project in Dubuque and Cedar Rapids. They are primarily charged with establishing a scientific basis for trading, meaning coming up with sort of a list of best management practices that could qualify for credit generation. We have to be vigilant about getting ahead of this in Iowa. I think we can kill it here, right? And we can educate our elected officials about why this is a bad idea and why it's going to make water quality worse. You have some friends. I mean, is Eisenhardt a senator, state senator? Or representative. Okay, he represents Dubuque, right? And my understanding is introduced a bill last year to establish water quality trading here firmly in Iowa. And so folks like him have to be educated on why this is a bad idea. Feel free to share reports. We can send you more of them. Educate your local officials. We need to start. We met with the Des Moines Register to educate them. We're hoping they'll editorialize against it, but we need your help in getting ahead of it here. And likewise, we appreciate CCI's efforts to also weigh in at the federal level as well.
Thank you. We're going to do just real quick, like 5 minutes of Q&A. So please, just so that we can get as many questions as possible, 30 seconds or less, and make sure it's a question, not a comment.
I just wanted to ask a couple quick questions, and I think I kind of maybe understand, but the poultry litter combustion, what exactly is it? What are the concerns with it?
Oh gosh, it's crazy. So we're starting to see renewable energy plants pop up, and they say it's a win-win. Like farmers are generating energy, they can, sell back into the grid. We're getting rid of our nutrient problem. Well, we're not getting rid of the nutrients of concern because in the case of a gasification plant, all of your phosphorus ends up in the ash, or much of your nitrogen ends up in the ash. You still have to get rid of it. It's been marketed as a fertilizer, but they can't find a market for it because we know nationwide we have too much manure, too little land. And so it's being stockpiled in food warehouses in the community, causing tremendous odor problems, and they are now pushing on FDA to get it qualified as a feed additive. So we're going to burn chicken litter and then feed it back to the animals is what they want to do to try to generate a market. It's a new source of pollution. We've got air emissions going up in the air. When we started looking at these plants, the first one was in Minnesota, which is a turkey litter incinerator. Their emissions were higher than coal-fired power plants in Maryland, where we were comparing them to, because Maryland also wants to put an incinerator in. Higher levels of greenhouse gases. So you've got a new emission source, you've got a byproduct you still need to get rid of. Like slaughterhouses, they will increase consolidation because they're reliant on the excess production of waste, and they need the feedstock, right? And so they're bad for lots of different reasons. But the industry is using water pollution trading, and they're also stacking carbon credits to sell into the California cap and trade market as a way to finance these facilities. I think you were second and third.
Is there a way to educate the ineffectual Secretary of Ag, Bill Sack?
Oh, so I'm sorry, the question was, is there a way to educate the Secretary Bill Sack? An effectual way. I'm not sure. He's shown to be USDA is the number one, EPA's also putting money into this, but this is USDA's game, right? And they're putting millions of dollars. We have folks here that have some connection to Chris Peterson, who's a former Farmers Union, president. We've had people who are trying to engage him. I don't know if it's going to be successful. I mean, he's in the back pocket of these big ag industries.
Great job, a lot of great stuff here. But you're in using the word agriculture, for example. You use the word factory farms and you use the word agriculture a lot. And so, how do you see it at Food and Water Watch? As is this a movement basically against farmers, or how would you define that? throughout your speech, you've criticized agriculture. You haven't been saying agribusiness. And by the way, do you tie this in with them with your farm bill work at Food and Water Watch?
Okay, so generally the main question is no, right? Are you anti-agriculture at Food and Water Watch? And two, are you changing this?
How are you doing that? Dealing with that as a strategy?
Yeah.
Because it might sound obviously, it kind of sounds that way.
Yeah. So it's a really good and fair question. So we are not anti-agriculture. We are anti-industrial food system. We are anti-consolidation. So we now have a food system where just 4 companies control, 60% of pork production, right? In every sector, I think it's even more consolidated in beef. We are pro-sustainable agriculture. So when you mentioned the Farm Bill, work on Farm Bill issues. We're not anti-subsidy, but we want subsidies to go to sustainable farmers who are not farming in a way that's harming communities, who are not farming in a way that's hurting the environment. And so most subsidies now go to factory farms, these large-scale confinement facilities, right? So we're about working to transition away from your industrial model of food production to a more sustainable one. We have a report called The Economic Cost of Food Monopolies. I wish I had copies of it with me. It's on our website. And we actually have a case study, a hog case study in Iowa, that looks at the economics of how local economies have changed since we've gotten more consolidated, bigger and bigger operations, right? And the truth is, even though you're producing more hogs, the farmers aren't doing as well. They're not doing as well financially. Local economies aren't doing as well. And so we're not anti-agriculture. We want a different way of agriculture that's better for farmers, where you can make a living wage, where it's better for communities.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you aware of anybody who's studying water quality related to nitrate levels that are compared to historical nitrate pollution? The reason I ask this is I recently went to the Iowa Swine Day, and an agricultural engineer at Iowa State was talking about manure management, and they actually know that nitrate levels are increasing in their manure, and they're going to continue to increase. So that means there's going to be more pollution of nitrates into the waterways. So I was wondering if you knew of anybody who's actually studying that to show that those levels are increasing.
I guess in my mind in Iowa, the strongest research group that's on our side is Iowa Policy Project. So we can kind of ask David Osterberg or someone around there, but I don't know off the top of my head.
And also, one of the problems with the lack of oversight is the lack of monitoring. So for a wastewater treatment plant, for example, they have to measure what they're putting into the waterways. They have limits. They have to do in-stream water. They just measure what's coming out of their pipes or whatever. Around agriculture operations, there's very little water quality monitoring. For these training programs, it's based on modeling. No one's actually going to confirm that the load reductions, these ag operations they're getting is actually the case, right? So we have little water quality monitoring done in general around these facilities. We have sort of water, where I do a lot of work in the Chesapeake Bay region, we have indications that, and studies showing that agriculture is the #1 source of water pollution in our country. That's true in Iowa as well, in terms of specific studies around agriculture operations like you're talking about, and the correlation between the increase in, you're saying, nutrients in the manure. I'm not aware of it, but I do think Iowa Policy Projects may be a good place to start.
All right. Let's give Terry and Michelle another hand. Let's come up to your last question. If you have any other questions, stick around, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer them for you. I'm Erica Blair. I'm a farming and environment organizer, and I just wanted to give you a quick update on our press stage fight. So you already heard from Nick Shute this morning on how we stopped the nation's 5th largest hog producer from building a massive slaughterhouse in Mason City. Yeah! And they did that by building people power. They hit the streets, went door knocking, collected over 3,000 petition signatures. They had letters to the editor in the newspaper every single day. They called and wrote to their city councilors. They put up flyers, put up yard signs, billboards, and they went to every single city council meeting. So they delivered over 15 hours of public testimony at those meetings, and we won. So it shows you that people power really can beat corporate power. So that's awesome.
And now it's on to Wright County to do the same thing.
But Prestige didn't go away, and we knew that they would come back. So now they are trying to locate in Wright County, just 5 miles south of Eagle Grove. And the people there understand what's at stake because they are already very saturated with factory farms. This is where DeCoster is located. So we have a lot of fighters over there. They're fighting tooth and nail to stop this slaughterhouse. And just on Thursday, we took a big group of people to the Iowa Economic Development Authority board meeting. So they were voting on giving Prestige $11.5 million, our taxpayer money, to a company that is going to continue polluting our water, our air, continue devastating our communities. So they heard from us. They heard some very powerful testimonies. 1 person voted against it on the board. 7 voted for it. So they are not listening to we the people, they're listening to Big Ag. But we sent them a strong message that we're not going away. This movement is growing, and we are not going to take this anymore. Enough is enough. So there will be 1 more vote in Wright County on Prestige. That's going to be on Monday at 9 a.m. in Clarion. So if you can, please go. We need as many people there as possible. But no matter what happens in Wright County, we're not stopping. We're going to continue fighting for clean water and clean air, family farmers, healthy communities, and Jess is going to tell you a little bit more about our campaign that's coming up.
Thank you, Miranda. All right, so we know we had a huge victory in Mason City. And we know that we have one hell of a fight in front of us. And we are battling Big Ag. That is a powerful lobby group, the most powerful lobby group in our state. But we know that if we work together, if we organize, if we fight back, if we take risks, we can beat corporate ag. We just got to build our people power. I'm going to tell you some startling numbers here quick. So as you probably heard in there are 9,000 factory farms in our state, over 9,000. And they produce 22 billion, it's a billion with a B, gallons of manure every single year in our state. That's spread on our land, and it makes its way into our waterways. We have 725 polluted waterways, which is a 15% increase from the report that EPA, or DNR and EPA put together 2 years prior.
And that's those that are
from
known.
630 to 725. This is our water crisis, folks. This is our water crisis. This is our pivotal moment to where we can go big or we can go home. Are we going to go big?
Yeah. Heck yeah.
We are going to go big. This is our Flint, Michigan. This is our Toledo, Ohio. This is our Florida Algal Blooms. We are in a moment where we have to be bold. We have to reimagine what is possible. We have to redefine what is possible. We have to make a demand so big that what we've been saying for the last few years seems extremely reasonable. And that's what we're going to do.
Moratorium.
Say it louder, Rosie.
Moratorium.
Everyone say it loud. Moratorium. Time for a moratorium. No more factory farms. No new ones. No expanding ones. We don't want any more.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. That's right. We are sick and tired of this industry taking over our communities. It is destroying communities. It is ripping relationships apart in these communities, including our water, our air. Our public money is going to an industry that is destroying our state. It's time to say enough is enough. Yeah. No more factory farms. When I started here 4 years ago, the debate was, is our water clean or dirty? I think we've won that, right?
Oh, yeah.
It is common knowledge that Iowa's water is polluted. We have to change the narrative. We have to say, now the debate is, should it be voluntary or mandatory? Well, we saw in some of these presentations, it has to be mandatory, right? And who should pay? The polluter or us?
The polluters.
The polluter, that's right. We want to make the polluters pay. We need a moratorium, regulations have to be mandatory, and polluters have to pay. And how are we going to do that?
People power.
People power. If Mason City showed us anything, we have to look at what happened there. That was a magical moment. People stepped up, went outside of their box. We heard Nick say last night, for anyone who was at the party last night, he said he didn't want to knock on doors. He was scared to knock on doors. But after he did the first one, it got easier. And he did the second door, and it got easier. We have to take those risks. It might be uncomfortable to talk to a stranger about factory farming, but once you do it a few times, it's going to get easier, I promise. We have to go to the Capitol and we have to lobby. We have to make sure that we're electing clean water officials, whether it's governors, state house, city council, supervisors. Ask them what they think about a moratorium. We have to start electing those people. But we know we can't just elect them because they say they want what we want. Because when we had a governor who was a Democrat, or a Democratic Senate and a Democratic representative or representative House, we still didn't win anything. We still didn't get local control. They all campaigned on it and we did not get it. So we have to build the power to make sure that people are governing as they campaign. You can't just say you want moratorium. I want you to pass a moratorium. I want you to fight for a moratorium. That's what we need to tell people.
Hold their feet to the fire.
Right, hold their feet to the fire. And that means we have to grow. We have to grow our base. We have to build more people, get them involved. We need to develop them as leaders, invite them to meetings. So who's in for this? Who's in for this, all right? This is going to be a big step. This is going to take a lot of work and a lot of commitment. But if we know that if what happened in Mason City was powerful, we stopped the nation's fifth largest hog producer, folks. That's huge. We can do the moratorium. We can do that. We can win it. But it's going to take a lot. So one first step, because this is going to be, what happens in 2018? Branson's out, right?
Yeah.
Branson's gone, finally. Heard he's not going to run again, is what we've heard. So we need an elected clean water governor. So we have the next 3 years to take those small steps along the way. What's going to build our power so that we can get to a moratorium? And so September 20th, the Environmental Protection Commission is going to be meeting to vote on some rulemaking. Who filled out one of those blue cards that we sent out probably April, May, June time? Those blue cards. So they're going to vote on that. So you wait in. We're going to hand deliver all those comments. We already submitted stuff online, but we're going to deliver those in person. But we need help. We need a lot of people there. We have to let them know that we expect strong rules and regulations and that we're not going to go home. So this meeting is likely going to be, we don't know the time or the location yet because they haven't released their public agenda, but it will likely be in Des Moines. It will likely start at 10, so we'll meet a little bit before that in our office so that we can carpool there together. But who thinks they can come on the 20th? All right, I'm going to keep your hands up because we're going to start to make a list so we can tell you this stuff. So we have Jan, Vern, Barb, Otis, Jerry, Susie, Rosie, Cherie, Sherry, Jeanette, Dixie.
20th of what month?
Of September. Next month. 1 month from today. Are you coming?
Tuesday.
All right. It's a Tuesday, yes. All right, you're coming. What? All right, Holly's coming with us. Kaylin's coming with us. She's taking time off work, folks. That's the kind of commitments that we need. I know it's hard to do this stuff when a lot of meetings are during the day, but that's what it's going to take. We're going to have to really push through this. So, are we ready to fight for a moratorium?
Oh, heck yeah.
All right, are we ready to win a moratorium? Yeah. All right. They dump it, we drink it. We won't stop till we clean it up. They dump it, we drink it. We won't stop till we clean it up. They dump it, we drink it. We won't stop till we clean it up. All right, folks. All right, quick logistics thing. Oh,
I'll do it.
Evan's going to do logistics for lunch.
All right, Evan Berger. I work with Justin and Erica. It's very, very simple. At the back of the room is the food. So if you will go and line up, the plates are at the end of the room at the back. So we kind of have to loop around, but you all get first crack. Congratulations.
Lunch break, so I'm going to take my stream down, and I will be back later that, so stay tuned.